Hello YouTube, Captain Mac here, and we are standing on the ground at Phoenix Sky Harbor looking at what one of the, I think for lack of a better term, probably we can call it one of the infamous payware add-on aircraft of our day. This is the PMDG 737 NGX, and I have to say that if you don't have this thing, you're probably missing out. Now, I understand there are a couple other payware 737s out there. An NGX, I think, from iFly has one. I haven't tried any of those, so I can't really speak for their quality versus PMDG other than what I've heard from others. And what I've heard really always comes back to the same thing, that PMDG really is just the cream of the crop as far as the 737 is concerned. Well, I don't know, but here's what I will tell you. I work at Sky Harbor, some of you already know that, and I have had an opportunity to talk with 737 pilots and have in fact verified that the procedures for this aircraft are spot on. They're absolutely spot on. So the startup procedure that we're going to go through today is in fact the startup procedure that you would go through in the real aircraft, with one exception. Normally when this aircraft is parked at a gate, and we are at a gate, I just rolled the gate back because we don't need it for our purposes today. We're not going to push the aircraft back. But normally when you're parked at a gate, you would have ground power plugged in, and you would have air conditioning plugged in, and all that would be running, and then you would fire up the APU a few minutes before pushback. We're going to go from completely cold and dark with no ground power hooked up for our startup today. That's really the only difference. Other than that, the process for starting the APU, the process for starting the engines, and for prepping the aircraft is the same. Now, for today, the only thing we're going to do is a cold and dark startup with an alignment of the IRS. And the only reason I'm going to do the alignment of the IRS is because if you want to do it right, you should really do it during the startup process. Now, like most of you, I've got mine set to go quickly, so the alignment doesn't take very long, but in the real world it does take about 10 minutes. So if you really want to add some immersion to that, or maybe you're doing some other prep work, getting ready for your flight, then you can, excuse me, you could always set the IRS alignment time to a normal time. But enough about that. I'll show you how to do it. It's really not that difficult once you know the procedure. I'm going to go through this step by step, and I'm going to try and make it as simple and straightforward as possible and eliminate any confusion. So I know there's plenty of other NGX, PMDG NGX cold and dark startups out there. I'm not taking anything away from those. I guess all I could say is what I bring to the table in this one is a little bit of a different flair, a little bit of a different personality, and perhaps a little bit of a different flow. There's really two ways of looking at starting this aircraft. You can follow the flows that were put in the manual by PMDG, or you can sort of create your own flows. I sort of have a little bit of my own flow, and that's what we're going to go with today. Alright, I think I've bumped my gums long enough. We all know I tend to do that quite a bit. Let's go ahead and hop on in the aircraft here. Quick jump. Bam, there it is. Alright. Give it just a second to load because it likes to take its time. As you can see clearly, the aircraft is completely cold and dark. Now, just so that everybody's aware here, if we wanted to, let's say we wanted to hook up ground power, and I like to pop these up. It's easier to work with them popped up. I've seen some guys, they work with them down here. I think it's easier to work with it popped up, so that's what I do. If I open up either one of these FMC/CDUs, whatever you want to call them, it is the FMC. It's the flight management computer. This is just the display unit. Alright, so we're going to go with FMC to make it simple. If I open up either one of these FMCs, or do it from down here and hold down the menu button, I'm holding it down, see it comes on like that. And that allows me to access some options here. Now I can't really do anything with the FMC itself because I don't have any power on the system. But what I could do if I needed to, I could change my fuel load. Okay, so let's say I only need a little bit of fuel for a short flight. I could go with the 1/3 option, or based on my flight plan I could put my fuel in there. Ground connections. This is really as far as our tutorial today. We're looking at, obviously you saw the wheel chocks were set. Now you have to have the wheel chocks set in order to do anything else here. If I take them off, I can't do anything else. So with the wheel chock set, if I wanted to connect ground power and air conditioning and so on, I could do that. We're not going to do that today. I just wanted to show you real quick that you do have access to a few different functions of the aircraft as far as FS or flight simulator actions are concerned when there's no power on the aircraft. It's not drawing from the battery or anything like that. This is just a simulation function. The real aircraft, you can't get power to this thing without the aircraft either having ground power hooked up or the APU running. At the very least, you have to have the battery on, but if you just turn the battery on, it's going to burn out pretty quick. Alright, so I think enough about that. Let's go ahead and let's start with firing up our APU. And in order to do that, we need to go up to our overhead panel here. Now, for some of us, this thing looks really confusing. It's actually not that bad. It's broken down into basically 5 rows. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you can see that each one is divided by the way the panel is set up, and each panel has its own functions. Alright, now we don't need to go through all of these functions right now. This is not an in-depth NGX tutorial. This is just a startup tutorial. Alright, so rather than follow a pre-start routine that goes through all of these panels and stuff like that, what we're going to do is we're going to follow a slightly different pattern which focuses on simply starting the aircraft. And this is how I do it, and come to find out, a lot of 737 pilots in the real world. Now, if you're a real-world 737 pilot and you don't do it this way, please don't beat me up down in the comments and say, "Oh, that's the wrong way. No, we don't do that. That's just horrible." Sorry, I had to grab a drink there. Okay, don't don't tear me up too much there. Okay, I do know from speaking to some 737 pilots that this is similar to the pattern they follow, so we're going to go with that. All right. So first things first. We need to get power on the aircraft before we can even start the APU, and that requires the battery. That's this switch right here. And all you have to actually do is flip that cover down, and it will turn the battery on. That being said, if it's nighttime and we have no light in here, we can also flip on the emergency lights at the same time, and that will give us lighting in the aircraft so that we can see what we're doing. All right, we're not going to use the lights today because we don't. Well, you know what? I'm going to flip them on. That's fine. I'm going to flip them on just so you can see, because it will light up a little bit. So we start by turning the battery on, and you can see we got all kinds of lights popping up here. And then if we flip on those emergency lights, you get a little bit of light, but it's daytime, so it's not much. But at night, huge help, right? Okay. In order to start the APU, we need some fuel into the aircraft. Now the left, I believe it's the left center pump is the one that the APU primarily uses. I simplify it. Just turn them all on. Even if you don't have fuel in the center pumps, you know, if you've got a really low fuel load, you may not have any fuel in the center pumps. I just flip them on anyway, and then you turn the pumps off later. That way I don't forget to flip on any fuel. The start switch for the APU is right here. If I click it once, it goes to on. I need to click it a second time, and you'll see it'll spring back. Comes back up on its own, and now the APU is starting up. You won't see anything for a minute, and then you'll see some lights right here. So we'll wait for those to come on. There's our low oil pressure light. That's okay. That'll go away in a second. What we'll see is this needle will basically shoot all the way up here near the top. There it goes. And that's the engine spinning up. Let's hop outside and see if we can hear it for a second. So you can hear the engine winding up now. That's our APU starting up. Now, when this needle gets back down just below the 4 mark here, you're going to see a light come on in the middle. In the middle of this light right here, in the middle of these bus transfer switches. When that light comes on, we can transfer power to the aircraft from the APU. So that light is on now, so I click this switch once. You're going to hear a lot of things come on when I do. Okay, emergency lights went off, more power on the aircraft. Now we go ahead and switch this one on as well, because you can see we're not getting any power to this side here. Okay, do we have to do that? No, not necessarily. But when we go to start the engines, we're going to need power to both sides, right? So we're good to go on that. Everything else on here is pretty much good the way it is. You can see there's no fuel in the center pumps, right? If we look down here, okay, here's our fuel. No fuel in the center pumps because I changed it to that lower fuel load. Sorry, I didn't mean to spring that around so quick. So I can turn those off now. All right. If I want to, I can add some air conditioning for the passengers, and I do that by flipping this one to auto, this one down to auto. This one's already open. I always flip it up to auto right there, and this one down to auto. And you can hear all the fans coming on and the circulation throughout the aircraft. Okay, not a necessary part of the startup for our purposes because we're in a simulator, right? And inside the simulator we don't have to, there's nobody back there to actually get any air conditioning. Now when you do take off, you are going to have to turn those on just as I did right there, because that also if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a part of the process for the pressurization of the cabin. Now I could be wrong on that. I'm no 737 expert. Alright, but there we go, they're on for now. Now keep in mind, when we get ready to start the engines, we're going to have to turn those back off. You cannot start the engines with those switches in the positions I just put them in. Okay, something to keep in mind. Okay, so we've got our APU running now, and if we look, that's provided power to our aircraft, but we have no navigation systems right now. There's two things we need to do for our navigation system. One is going to take place with our FMC, and the other one's going to take place up top here. So we have our overhead panel. This is the lower overhead. If we go up a little higher here, and I've got a button tied to it, this is the upper overhead. In order to align the IRS, we need to click each of these switches twice to the nav to align with the nav indicator here. And then what will happen is we'll see a little light that will come on here that says on DC. And then we're going to wait for that to switch to align. So click them both on. It says on DC. And then when it goes to align, we click them back to align. And that's a left click. So I right click them to bring them to nav. And then I left click to take them over to align. And now they're starting to align. But in order for them to complete the alignment process, we need to go into our FMC. And we need to click on the, clear that out so it doesn't confuse you. Click on position init, which actually just means initialization. It's position initialization, and then we need to set our IRS position. How do we do that? You need to go to the next page. You can see there's 4 pages here. Click next page, and then grab either one of these GPS locations here. You can see it says enter IRS position now. Click on either one of them, and it's going to put it down here in the scratch pad. And then go back, hit previous page, and put that right here. That's it. That's all we need to do to align the IRS system. The rest of it's an internal process, and it's going to take care of itself. So we're going to go on that now. So basically all we would do at this point is we'd start setting up our flight plan, whatever it may be. And this is not a tutorial on that, so I'm just going to throw something in here real quick, just for the sake of just for doing it while the IRS aligns, because it takes about 60 seconds on mine. So I could grab a company route, it doesn't matter which one. We're not in Denver, we're in Phoenix, so anyone coming out of Phoenix would be just fine. Grab the company route. And again, this is not a tutorial on this, I'm just doing this to take a minute and oh, my brain just completely went blank. I mean, it just went complete blank there. I've just taken a minute so the IRS can align. That's the only reason I'm doing this right now. So, in case you're wondering why I'm not telling you everything I'm doing here, I am going to do a tutorial on how to use the FMC in this aircraft. I'll probably do it a little later today and see about posting these at the same time. But the whole point here is just to kill a little time for a second so that my IRS can align. Sorry about that. I completely lost my mind there. I drew a total blank. Now we're not going to be taking off in this aircraft, so I'm really just, like I said, I'm just kind of going through the motions here for a second just to get things set up. We would need to pick a departure and arrival. You know, if we took, let me think here, runway 26 is what I was thinking of, 26 and then BXK, because the route I picked was to San Diego. Now you're probably thinking, what are you talking about? Don't worry about it. This is not about the FMC. This is about the startup. So okay, we're good to go. Our FMC set up, and by now our IRS should be aligned. So if we go back up here and we click these over, one right click to nav, and we're good to go. Now if it hasn't aligned for some reason, what should happen is the align light that we just saw on should start blinking. If that happens, you need to turn it off and leave it off for 30 seconds before you go through the alignment process again. If you don't, you're not going to get it to align. So just remember that. Alright? Okay, enough. We're ready to start the engines at this point. Normally, of course, at this point, our flight plan's set up, we've loaded our passengers, and we would talk to the ground crew about doing a pushback, and then we would start the engines during pushback. We're not going to push back the aircraft today. We're just gonna start the engines where we're sitting. Guess what that was? That's right, that was my phone. Okay, so not much left to do actually, believe it or not, to start the engines. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hop up to the overhead panel, and to start our engines, this is the engine start here. Now, I usually click it on both, but I still only do one at a time. Talking with some real-world pilots, they always choose the one they want to start. So we'll click it to right ignition. Now, before we try to start, we need to verify a couple things. First of all, this needs to be off. So we'll click that off. Wrong way. The packs need to both be off, and we need to move this isolation valve down to open. Now here's the key right here. This is the APU bleed switch. That's the off position. APU bleed must be on in order to start the engines. So make sure your APU bleed is on, your recirculation fan is off, both of your packs are off, and your isolation valve is open. With all of that done, I can start the engine. So I'm going to left click on this knob. We always start the right engine first. I'm going to left click on this knob so that it'll turn to the ground start function. And when I do that, some things are going to start happening. So I've clicked it there. Okay, and we look here and it says the start valve is open here. And we can see that our N2 is starting to come up. Now, originally I was told that when this gets around 10 to 12 you can go ahead and add fuel to the engine. Turns out that's wrong. It needs to be at 25 or higher. It's at 24 now. 25 or higher before you add fuel to the engine, or you're going to hot start it. Once you hit 25 or higher, all you do is click on the fuel for that engine, which in this case is engine number 2. I've clicked the fuel on and you can see the engine's firing up now. That's our engine gas temperature coming up. This is our N1, which is starting to spin up now, and the engine's coming online. And you can hear it coming up as well. Banging into stuff on my desk here. Did you hear that little click while I was running my mouth? That little click was the engine start switch clicking back to the off position. That tells us that the engine's running. Now all we want to do is let it stabilize. So I usually flip this over to left, let everything stabilize for a few seconds, which it pretty much already has. Once we're stabilized, we can go ahead and start the process for starting engine number 2. Same exact process. We're going to click, engine number 1, but our second start. You're going to click the switch, left click the switch so it goes to ground start. We're seeing everything starting to spin up a little bit. Our N2 is starting to come up, and we're just waiting for that N2 right here to get to 25 or higher. Now you might not be able to see that very well, so let's do this. Okay, this is what we're looking at. We're waiting for this to get to 25 or higher. It's now at 25, so I can go ahead and enter fuel into the system, and I'm just using my little easy dock here. That would probably be a better view. So now that I've done that, you can see it continues to spin up. Fuel flow, that's what FF is. That's our fuel flow. Fuel's going into the engine now, and we can see that our N1's starting to come up as well. And let's listen for that ignition switch to turn itself off. There it goes. You heard the little click there? That was the ignition switch turning off. Set this back to both, and that's it. Engines are started. If we look down here, we can see that we're just waiting for this for the left engine to stabilize a little bit, and it's pretty much done that at this point, and both engines are running and ready to go. Now you notice we've got a few cautions here, flight controls and some other things. If I hit the recall, some others will pop up. I'm not going to. Tells us that our traffic collision avoidance system is off. We'll deal with that in another tutorial. But once you've completed starting the engines, you want to turn the yaw damper on. That light will go off in a second. probe heat needs to come on. That's your pitot tubes. Hydraulic pumps on. And then we can turn all of this back on as well. So auto for the recirculation fan, auto for the left and right packs, and auto for the isolation valve. And now I can turn the APU bleed off. If I click each of these generator switches, 1, 2, it sends everything back into the APU, if you will. That's kind of just, that's my visualization. What I've done is I've turned off the bus transfers. So I've sent everything back to the APU. Now I can turn it off by right-clicking this. And now our APU is off. Forward entry is open because I never closed the door. Now it's closed. You can see main exit closing there. And then before we take off, of course, we want to set our cruise altitude on here. So I think I put 32,000 in the FMC, and then we would want to put our landing altitude, which in this case we're going to San Diego. Typically you can do landing altitude up to plus 500 feet. So San Diego's real close to sea level. I would probably just put it at 200 feet. And that's it, folks. We have started the engines on the PMDG NGX, and we're ready to go. Well, of course, we didn't push back or anything, but if we would have pushed back, and we'd be ready to start taxiing out at this point. Of course, we'd want to set all of this information as well, but that's a different tutorial. I think what I'll do from this is I will do a tutorial that is a full flight preparation. So the idea here was to do something relatively short. I don't know how long this has been so far, but the idea here was to do something relatively short that just shows how to start the engine. So I'll take a look at this video, and if I think it looks good, then I'll go ahead and post it up on YouTube, and you'd be watching it right now. That being said, please let me know if you have any questions. Throw something down in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer them to the best of my ability. If you are any type of expert on the 737, a legitimate expert, not somebody who just thinks they are, please go ahead and put something down in the comments. Let me know if I made any mistakes, anything that maybe should be done a little differently. Obviously, the idea here, if you have this aircraft, you're trying to add a little immersion into your world. Please subscribe to my channel. I appreciate everybody who's come on board. The numbers are climbing relatively quickly, and I'm very excited about that. So look forward to seeing some more subscribers come on board with us. Little shout out to my latest subscribers. I won't say names on here because I don't know who does and doesn't want their name used on my YouTube videos, so not going to do that. Other than that, short and sweet, I guess we would say it was a real fun video per se. I'm backing away here a little bit because that was probably a little loud. But, you know, I enjoy all of this. I really have a good time with this, and I hope you guys learned something from it, and you're able to hop in this thing and get her going pretty easy. So until next time, I'm Captain Mac, and you guys keep the blue side up unless you're crossing the Pacific.